So let's start getting rid of the mystery of what the chargeback department is. First, up on the upper right there, that's where it is, and it's here at Broad Hollow. That's the phone number that you should have in your phone or in your Rolodex or however you keep track of relevant information related to this job. That's the number you're going to call, or make sure your merchants know to call when they get a transmittal letter, which we're going to go over, a chargeback letter or anything else. There's a dedicated desk there run by someone named Dominic, who's going to be on the call on Friday, who's probably the most technically proficient person in the industry, if not at least at Evo, who runs that department, and they have a large group of people who are basically customer service to help your merchants so you get through these things. They process over 40,000 claims a year, so you can imagine how many that is. Everything's mailed from them. So again, they're the ones doing everything, and that's going to be your go-to. Their job is to help you and help your merchants. One other thing, or a couple things that I've learned in the field: when you fill out an application, you're sometimes having different addresses for the DBA and the legal name. You need to, and we're going to go through this a little later in the presentation, you need to go over with the merchant and ask them, where do you want chargeback letters and transmittal letters sent to? I have a big chain I just got, and they actually want it to a third address, because the address the letters are getting mailed to then go to someone else who then has to send them to the CFO, and by the time they get them, they have less time to respond. So again, this is just value add. You want to have this as part of your conversation with people to get the accounts, and then when you get them, and logistically when you do the applications, you want to ask that question. On top of that, they can be faxed instead of mailed, and the benefit here is they get them quicker. And again, that's something you want to ask at the application process, so then it can be part of your system and get EPSG support desk to do it the right way. Some merchants really like that, and they like that a lot better. From an email perspective, we're not there yet because there's lots of PCI rules that have to be adhered to. At some point, hopefully through the portal, they can be emailed in the future. I know that's what everyone probably wants, and merchants ask me all the time. At the moment, we can't do that, but we're working towards that, and when we get to that, we'll have a follow-up, hopefully in the next, realistically 3 to 6 months. Okay, next slide. So what is the value add? Again, I kind of touched this already, but in general, chargebacks are a very hated subject because the merchant loses money and they want to blame everyone but themselves. How are we going to turn that around? This is a necessary evil, and you have a great opportunity here to become an advisor, not just a salesperson, and really stand out, because I'd say less than 5% of the sales force is having this conversation, let alone helping them through the process. And by doing that, you're going to stand out and add much more value and not just be someone competing on price. And everything we do here, and it's what I think what's made me be somewhat successful, is that I'm focusing on all these other things, not just price, so I stand out. And once you get that goodwill with your merchants, they're never going to leave you, so hence the retention goal, and help you get clients. But most importantly, they just look at you as an advisor, not just some quote-unquote merchant services guy or gal. The chargeback rules are very confusing, especially after EMV, and again, it gives you an opportunity to look educated and smarter than the next person in this business. Again, any questions, please shoot them out there, and Jeff will get them, and we'll respond to them later in the presentation. Okay, again, what are the benefits here? You're changing the dialogue from pricing to an advisory role. It's going to help you get merchants, as we discussed, because you're going to bring this up while you're competing, and most of these merchants are going to be shocked because no one does that. They're only used to someone saying, oh, I can save you money, which again, of course, is important, but this is another avenue to discuss with them and stand out. Again, I touched on retention already. I mean, the retention rate for you is going to go almost to 100% if this becomes a big part of your dialogue. And hence, if they feel that way about you, it's a lot easier to ask for referrals or for them to give you referrals. And we're going to touch later on a very important part, which I never really realized till I started working with EPSG, and even months after, that this is a profit center. There is margin. You can increase your margin, which is amazing. And most importantly, you deserve it because of all the things we just discussed. You're becoming an advisor. You're adding time and value that other people aren't. So where you can make money here, why not? And it's a great benefit, which we're going to go through in a little bit. as another way just to make some more money. Not that we're hoping our merchants get chargebacks, but when they do, if you add real value, you should be paid for it. Okay, this is another part that until the last couple months where I started working on this, I really didn't know a lot about this. Let's walk you through the whole process. I don't know how many of you even have ever seen a retrieval letter or a chargeback letter that the customer gets, but let's walk you through the process. First is what's called a retrieval letter. It used to be required, and we'll go through this a little bit later. This is really a summary right now. The customer who's in dispute can go right to the chargeback letter, but normally a retrieval letter is first sent out, and that's really just a general request through Evo for us, the merchant, and with our help, to come back with a receipt or to prove what happened in a very general way, not a very specific way. And that's the retrieval response. You have a certain amount of time to respond to it. Then, if that doesn't solve it, because in a lot of cases, the customer will then be, oh, you know what, I did actually make that charge, and then they move on. But if they still want to dispute it, then a chargeback letter comes. You have a certain period of time for the customer to actually issue the chargeback letter through the issuing bank, and it could be more than 6 months. So this is another reason that your merchants really have to keep all their information for a very long period of time, which we'll go through. The chargeback response is actually called a representment, if you ever hear that word, and that's your merchant's response to the chargeback letter. After that, if it's not resolved yet, there's something called pre-arbitration, and there's lots of steps there. Up until now, it's all self-governed. It's us, EPSG, and Evo representing the merchant, and the issuing bank representing the merchant's customer. If it gets past there to an arbitration process, which is the last step, that's when the credit card associations come in, and there is a penalty at that point of normally about $400 to $500 for whoever loses. So at that point, the customer and the merchant have to really believe that they have a really good case. And that's really the full process. This is the page. If you don't get anything else out of this presentation, you should print this out and keep it, because this is just a summary of the whole process that will allow you to help your merchant and look like a real advisor and really intelligent on the chargebacks. Okay. We're going to go into more detail now, but that is the summary of really the whole presentation. Okay. So American Express is a little different. They actually require more than when it's Visa, MasterCard, Discover in the retrieval process. And there's less time to respond to the chargebacks when it comes to Amex. It's normally only about 20 days. And then lastly, this is the one other thing I please take from this presentation that it took me a while after talking to Jeff to really understand. When they get the retrieval or the chargeback letter, Evo, and they have I'll give you the rationale even though I don't necessarily totally agree with it, they shorten the time frame that the merchant has to respond because they want to motivate and create a catalyst for the merchant to make sure they respond and not come down to the last minute, which I like on one hand, but on the other hand, a lot of times the merchant may not get this letter till it looks like they have very, very little time to respond. You need to let your merchants know that they normally have more time, and this is just, I guess, a tool for us to make sure you respond, because there have been cases where the merchant doesn't respond because they don't think they have any time, and then they may blame us. Explain to them they should do everything possible to respond within the time frame, but they really do have more time than the time frame. So please remember that. One last thing on American Express is, you don't have to go back though, is I asked this straight to Dominic because this has come up also in the past. Some people think they need to stay with American Express because they have a better defense in chargebacks, and Dominic can talk about this on Friday. Dominic assured me that that's not the case, and we can defend them just as good, if not better, because they have us, where in the other cases they really just have themselves, but we can touch upon this a little more on Friday. So just remember that as well. Okay, so agenda. I think we've done a pretty good job covering everything in general, but we're going to go into more detail. We're going to go over the whole dispute process overview and timeline. We're going to go over the retrieval request overview and any recent changes. We're going to go over the chargeback overview and changes, and then disputes and some prevention tips. The rest of this presentation, which is very long, some of it we're going to go through, some of it not. This actually came from some very in-depth presentations that Dominic gave at some association seminars. I don't think we need to hit every point, but I would like you guys to go through what we don't and then follow up with questions on Friday. But we're going to go through some of it. And before I do, one last thing. Again, Friday, we have Dominic, Jeff, and I doing a follow-up. We're going to answer any real-life question you have, not just on the presentation, but that you have come across with your merchants or think you could come across with your merchants. So I want you to take some time after this presentation to really think it through and come back, because Friday is a real-life, practical discussion. And then we're going to have one follow-up on Tuesday where Brett, again, is going to show you how he used this as a tool to build his business. Okay. Next page. So again, some of the stuff you guys may know, you may not. This is just a page that reminds you all the players, not just in the industry, but relating to chargebacks. Obviously, there's the customer who's the card holder. They have an issuing bank who gave them the card. Then everything flows through the different associations of the credit cards to the acquiring bank. That works through EVO and EPSG to our client who's the merchant. So when you're going through the process I went through before, it's really, the merchant, us, EPSG, EVO, and the work on one end, and we're dealing with the acquiring bank and the issuing bank really on the other side. The acquiring bank's kind of in the middle with us. And that's who's kind of going back and forth and trying to resolve what's the fairest way to resolve the dispute that the customer came up with. Okay. So let's just go through this again. The retrieval starts. Again, they don't have to go with retrievals anymore. So if anyone gets a chargeback letter first, that's why. But in general, you're going to get retrieval letters first. In general, then the merchant responds to the retrieval. Sometimes it'll go away because it'll clarify. Other times, in most cases, you're going to come back with the first chargeback letter. In general, they have 120 to 180 days, but depending on which card type, you sometimes have even more. And I know sometimes the merchant gets upset that it's 6 months later, but that's the rules. And again, you need to, let's take one step back again. You need to explain to the merchant that you're on their side, you're their advisor, and them in EPSG and EVO are there to support them. That's your role. You're doing everything you can to help them prevent, which is another discussion we're going to have today, Friday, and next Tuesday. What are preventative measures? But you're doing everything possible to help them prevent or win a chargeback. Some of these rules that they may not like, you have to explain, are coming from the associations themselves that we can't do anything about. But again, our job is to help them. So the representment, again, aka chargeback reversal, they have a certain period of time. I mean, this slide says 45 days, but I wouldn't focus so much on that, but rather they get the letter and they need to respond as quickly as possible. Okay? Visa Discover, they talk about a pre-arbitration request of 30 to 60 days from the response from the merchant. MasterCard's a little different. I don't want you to focus so much on all these technical numbers, but again, that first page I gave you early, which gives you the timeline of the process so that you can always support the merchant in responding properly and always promote responding as quickly as possible. But these give you some time frames. All right, what is a retrieval request? As we discussed already, that's initial request initiated by the card holder directly to their payment card issuing bank. So again, a lot of times this is where, and you may have done this as a customer yourself with a credit card, you may get a charge, you don't remember what it is, and by the little description or the address, you don't remember it. So you may dispute it. And you call your credit card company and they send this retrieval. A lot of times, now the merchant, with our help, responds properly with a proven receipt explaining who they are. And then if it's a legitimate, ethical merchant, customer, they'll walk away. And that'll be the end of it. Other times, and at the end of this slide, it talks about you basically need to show a sales draft and some other things, and that's what you'll help the merchant, or if they call the 1-800 number with your help, they'll explain to them how to respond. Other cases, that won't end, and then it'll get to the next step, which we'll go over now. So in order to fulfill a retrieval request, a transaction receipt must contain the following. These are all the types of things, depending on the type of industry and the type of merchant and the way they're doing business, that they'll respond. We're going to show you a sample form in a minute, but these are the type of things the merchant has to go through. And again, with your help and our department desk help, they're going to respond. So I don't know if, I'm curious if you guys want to respond and type the answer to this. How many of you really have ever seen these before? I really never did up until maybe 3 to 6 months ago. Now it's very important to me. So the first one is the retrieval sales draft request. And the second one is a second request. So if you look through this, so a few people responded that they have, and that's great. That means you're ahead of the game and you're helping your merchants. That's great. A lot of people haven't responded, so maybe that means they haven't. So for those who haven't, you should look through this, because this is just showing you what you need to do and what this presentation is teaching you, and this is what the merchants, how they respond. Again, the date of when they have to respond, do not take that as gospel. Remind that of your merchants so they respond even if they think they don't have time. But this is what they get, and this is what they have to respond to. And someone just mentioned that their merchants call them when they get this, and that's great. For those of you that haven't, I think this is a great time for you to call your merchants and educate them on it, because you don't know what they're doing then if they're not calling you, and they're not looking at you as the advisor. They may call the desk. Now Jeff may get a little upset with me here, but the desk in general does a great job. But in some cases, maybe the desk doesn't do a great job. And if they don't call you and let you be the quarterback on it, you're at their mercy. And the desk really is only giving them general information. Their job, they're not allowed to really dig deep, and that's your job. And Natalie just mentioned that to me as well. And that's really important, because it's not their customer, it's your customer, and you need to own this. And by knowing all this information, you can do a great job. We're going to talk a little more that it doesn't mean they're going to win, and you need to, over time, manage that expectation, but they're going to know that you're doing everything you can for them. And the one we just passed is to remind your merchant also, they need to, in a sense, keep the receipt for a certain period of time. Now, to be fair, our back office can always, normally, depending on the technology being used, get that. But that's why they, in some sense, have to keep their receipts for at least 6 months. Okay. I think in general, this next one, we're getting a little too technical, but we'll go through some of it. I mean, I'm going to skip this page. It's really pretty technical in terms of some things going on there. I don't think we need to so much go through, unless, Jeff, you want to touch on anything. Okay. So now that was all the transmittal process. Now what is a chargeback? Chargeback is a process an issuing bank uses to handle a disputed transaction that got past the transmittal process. Issuing banks are given certain rights under the Payment Card Association rules to reverse a sales transaction. Chargebacks can be initiated by the cardholder or by the bank. It can be because of something that happened fraudulently, because of errors, stuff that's omitted. It could also be done when a cardholder is just dissatisfied with what was delivered. So those are all some of the reasons why chargebacks happen. Jeff, you want to go next slide? Yeah. So here's the same thing. Here's the chargeback letter that they get. It looks somewhat like the transmittal letter, but what have we learned from earlier? It requires much more detailed information to respond. And that's the key here. They need to respond in a much more thorough way. I don't think it's so much our job to do this for them. It's really not, but it's to remind them and talk to the merchant, make sure that they give a very thorough response, because the more thorough response they have, the better chance they have of reversing the chargeback. So merchants may dispute chargebacks depending on the chargeback reason code, and that code's given in the letter that they get. The dispute of a chargeback is referred to as a repressment that we talked about. In order to represent a chargeback, it must be performed with a certain period of time, which we've already discussed, with a certain proper documentation. One other thing, I'm not sure if this is the next slide or not, but let's go through when they get debited. In general, in most cases, the merchant is going to get debited at the chargeback response time. So they're going to get that letter, but they're going to already be debited. So I think most merchants know this, but some don't, and they don't understand why all of a sudden they got a debit for a certain amount. You need to explain to them that by card association rule, not ours, that's when the debit happens, and then you respond, and if you win, that will then get reversed immediately. So again, these next few pages give lots of different reasons for chargebacks. and the different codes. You don't need to focus so much on these today or memorize them or anything like that. But when they get these letters, you need to go through the code so you can explain why they got the chargeback. I'll give you a few examples. I have a large garage owner relationship. Their technology, other than a few, are not EMV. And let's talk about EMV for a minute because it changed a lot of rules. And again, Dominic will talk more about this on Friday. But he doesn't have EMV technology at a lot of his locations. He doesn't even have attendees. So literally, and you may be surprised, in this industry, there are people out there now using the parking garage and then disputing it. And in those cases, the merchant automatically loses because he doesn't have EMV technology. And I had to explain that to the merchant. And it was not the easiest conversation, but it was a great conversation because then we discussed, look, what's the cost of upgrading your technology? And we discussed it. And then he said, you know what, Brad, for now, I'd rather pay these and lose, even though it burns me up that I provided the services properly because the cost is very low compared to what it would cost for him to upgrade. And then at some point, then if he has to upgrade the technology, he does. I also said you can always use terminals. And then what did I do there? I'm on the same side with him. I'm giving him solutions, and he's educated. If he didn't call me to discuss these things, he could get pissed off and think it's our fault, and I could lose him. And that I think is a great lesson, and I'm sure you guys have some lessons out there. And again, a few people just said this has happened to them as well. But by running away from this, that's not a solution. Okay. And just to remind you, next week, we're going to discuss some of these examples, especially restaurants and retail that are doing delivery in an EMV environment and what they can do to help try to prevent the dispute to begin with and then fight it. Here's another example. For those of you that have recurring customers, there are certain rules and certain language they have to use or they're going to lose. So merchants are not allowed to use general terms and conditions to enroll a card holder in a recurring transaction. I didn't know that. And if you have merchants that are doing a lot of recurring, you need to explain to them that they have to have specific language discussing this, or else a merchant who's not ethical, a customer who's not ethical could come back and say, I didn't know they were going to charge me, and they would automatically win even though they use the services properly. That's another good example. Talk a little bit on this, and again, I think Friday and Tuesday we're going to go into much more detail on what's preventative. I talked about this yesterday a little bit for those of you that may or may not have been on, but one simple other thing that you need to be talking to your merchants about is the disclaimer on the receipt on a terminal or otherwise. You need to really go and I don't do a good job with this, and I need to do a better job myself. You need to discuss with the merchant when you sign them up or when you have them, what is your refund policy? And it has to be specific. Most people, including myself, don't even put that in the application, and they just have the generic, the tech team puts a generic language in there, which is what they need to do if we don't tell them what to do. And most of the time it may not matter, but maybe they have very specific refund policy that you don't even know about. If they don't put it on there, it's not enforceable. Again, just a great conversation to have at the right time, show that you're looking out for them and that you're knowledgeable. Again, I'm not, this next page, please feel free to look through on your own, but it's just more, it's a lot of detail. I want to get through this conversation without going into too much more detail. Just realize though, it reminds me of one thing. Customers can come back with a second chargeback reason even after your merchant responds to the first one. So just realize that as well. Again, read through these on your own. We'll discuss some more on Friday and Tuesday. It just talks about some more preventative tips, which we'll discuss on Friday and Tuesday. And the rest of this presentation talks about the pre-arbitration arbitration. I don't want to go through it today because we want to be short and sweet on this presentation, but if you get past where we just got to, this can go to arbitration, and then there'll be a letter sent out, again, with more requests for your merchant to respond to the arbitration to try to win it, but they have to know at that point it's in the letter that if they lose, it's normally a $500 cost to the loser. Doesn't mean they shouldn't respond, but you need to help make sure that they're educated on their likelihood of winning to decide whether they should respond. And that's not necessarily the team at the chargeback department's role. That's for us to educate, and if it's really important, certainly myself, Jeff, and the rest of the team can help explain to you what's going on in those specific cases, but you need to, again, be part of the process for your merchants if it gets to pre-arbitration and arbitration. So the rest of this, I'm not going to really go through. I want you to read it on your own, and then maybe it'll prompt some more questions, but it just talks about the rest of the process. So what did I want you to take away from today? This is one of many tools we're going to teach you that's going to allow you to make the conversation much more than just about price, which of course is important. But the more you talk about chargebacks and PCI, which we're going to go through, and other topics, and you're going to become much more to your merchant. One other thing I failed to go through. Let's talk about margin now, okay? Which is the most important to us in an immediate gratification perspective. When you fill out any application, I think it's pre-coded transmittal letter and chargeback for $30, or is transmittal less?
Retrieval and chargeback.
So they're both they're both hard coded for $30. You have to check your Schedule A. I think in general they're both about $10 or $15. I used to mark those down, and I realized what a mistake. A, because of all this we just talked about, you're providing a service that deserves to get paid for it, and that's the industry norm. I don't think you'll ever lose an account because you charge them $30 on these things. I'm happy to hear you guys' perspective, but if you provide all the service you deserve when they come up with one to get $15 to $20 of profit on the transmittal letter and on the chargeback, and in those cases you're spending more time on, you're going to make more money, and you should. So make that part of your regular process when you fill out an application. It is hard-coded, so you can leave it there, which is my recommendation, but even if you charge less, make sure it's more than your Schedule A so you make some profit. And again, if you do everything we just discussed, you're adding more than enough value to justify it. Someone just asked, when is this going to be on the university? I would say probably in the next week to 2 weeks, but I'm going to have Nancy or Lewis or someone else here email out when it is in there so you'll know. But our practice, again, will be everything we do, and the next one's going to be PCI. It's going to be a series of 3 presentations. So this one is today, second one's Friday, third one's Tuesday, and then it'll get up on university sometime after that. We're always here for questions. Really think through this. Come up with practical questions for Friday. You have Dominic at your disposal and us. And then Tuesday, again, Brett and I are going to come up with some real-life industries, how to apply everything we talked about. But talk about and think about industries and specific merchants that you need help with, or problems that have come up. I think what you should come up with is pick 1 or 2 merchants you have, and then ask for this specific merchant, what can we do to help them be preventative, and then help them when they get one. And then we'll apply that to Friday and Tuesday's presentations. I'm going to give everyone a minute or two to come up with any more questions for today. And if not, I urge you guys, come up with some real questions for Friday so that we're not just running the presentation, and instead we're answering your specific questions beyond the stuff that I run across in the field that I'm integrating into these presentations. We'll just give 1 more minute. We don't have any questions at the moment, though. Great question. Natalie asked, does the $30 for the chargeback get refunded? The answer is no. That's the cost of us having a full chargeback department, and the cost for you to be spending the time to help them with it, and that's the profit where you can add margin on this part. Look, if we don't want our merchants to have chargebacks, but if it's part of the industry, it's a necessary evil as we described it early. So when you have it and you apply now everything we helped you learn and what you've learned on your own, again, it's margin that you deserve, and it'll add to your book.
And if I could add just one more thing to Natalie as well, it's not an uncommon request whatsoever to request a refund on this amount. Now, we do end up eating the cost of that, so it's not something we love to do, but we certainly don't want to lose a merchant over a one chargeback and a small fee. So we'll kind of leave that where it is there. So traditionally speaking, no, they do not get a refund. However, don't lose a merchant over it, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, so it's a case-by-case basis, but what I want you to take away from today is it should be part of your business because of the time and services you provide. Obviously, on a one-off, yourself and the management team here is going to always make a good business decision, but in general, learn from my lesson, which was I used to mark these things down, and I'm providing way too much value and time on these that I should get paid on it. I once in a blue moon, you can also evaluate what to, it's a case by case, whether you want to reverse the 30 or not and who's going to eat that. But let's take that on a one by one basis. In general, everyone charges this and everyone doesn't provide any value. So you're charging the same amount as your competitors, but you're actually adding so much more value. And that's what I'd like you to take away from today. So with that said, Friday of Dominic, Jeff, and I, we're going to go over stuff that Dominic knows that I have no clue, which is much more than I know even. So he's going to drill down even more on this stuff, answer any questions you have from a technical perspective. We'll start to answer your questions from a practical perspective and follow up with Tuesday where Brett himself is going to teach you how he used this as a tool to build his book and, again, answer questions you may have related to specific merchants or industry. And thank you for your time today.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Brad. Fantastic stuff, guys. I hope you guys took a lot from today's training. I very frequently have to field a lot of chargeback questions, and if nothing else, I think hopefully one of the takeaways you guys realize is that the chargeback reasons and policies is a lot more nebulous than people really want to admit to, if you follow me, right? There's lots of different there's lots of different reason codes and lots of different methods to achieve those, so it's never a black and white answer. But a big part of this is disclosure. I don't know how many times you guys do these moto accounts, and in the underwriting process, we ask for stuff like, what is that return refund policy? And I know it's a bit of a road bump when we're trying to get a deal approved, but it's very important to have stuff like that disclosed properly for the event that these chargebacks come through. Because if it's not disclosed properly, they will never win a chargeback ever. Okay?
And just to finish on that point, Friday and Tuesday are going to touch upon this a lot more from a preventative perspective. I know we're asking a lot for you to do 3 in 5 days, but I'd like you to try to get on. I didn't do it myself today because Dominic is the real expert here, and I didn't want to misspeak on something. I have my own thoughts, which I shared a little today, but we're going to go through. I guarantee there's almost no one in this industry is going to merchants they're trying to get or they have, and they're telling them preventative measures to avoid chargebacks. And that would be great for you guys to be able to have. So we're going to go over that Friday. And again, it's a lot easier to help them from a preventative perspective than to win a chargeback. Once it gets to the chargeback, if they haven't done the right thing, they're going to probably lose. And that's I didn't really talk about that, but that's the reality. So to the degree you've helped them from a preventative perspective, you're way ahead of the game. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Everybody have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you guys on Friday. Like you mentioned a couple times, I definitely recommend attending that. Dominic we're really lucky to have him on staff at Evo. He's definitely one of the brightest minds, and he's literally world-renowned. He goes on speaking tours all throughout the world about chargebacks, so he's a really, really knowledgeable guy. I suggest you guys being there, as well as next Tuesday with Brett. That's always a fun, interesting presentation, and I tell you, this is something he's been really pushing for because he's really built a huge book of business off of understanding this procedure very, very well. So,
please come up with questions for Friday because Dominic's amazing, but he's very technical, and he's going to answer a lot of technical questions or a presentation perspective. But if you have real-life practical merchants to discuss, this is the chance that we'll have him to do it. So